joining us this evening. My name is Arpi, and my team members and I will be presenting a brief overview of the accounting principles and practices in the Republic of China. My team members include Natalia, Kemi, Jingyi, and Brian. China is officially known as the People's Republic of China, and it's a country in East Asia, and it's the world's most populous country with a population of over 1.3 billion, and it has the largest country, and it's the world's second largest country by landmass with an impressive economy. China has had a checkered past, but has emerged to become a superpower. From its founding in 1949 until the 1970s, China was a Soviet-style centrally planned economy without private businesses or capitalism. Many efforts and programs were implemented to propel this country towards a more modern, industrialized, communist society. Over the centuries, some of the programs were successful and others were not so successful and had mixed economic results. One such program was that implemented by Mao Zedong with the Great Leap Forward in the early 1960s. Soon after that, after his death, and the consequent end of a cultural revolution, a new Chinese leadership began to reform the economy and move it towards a more market-oriented, mixed economy with a one-party rule. Soon, agricultural collectivization was dismantled. Farmers were privatized, and China's landscape and culture was transformed to increase productivity. Since the introduction of economic reforms in the 1978, China has become the world's fastest growing major economy. As of 2012, it is the world's second largest economy after the United States by both nominal GDP and purchasing power parity. And it is the world's largest exporter and second largest importer of goods. To say the least, China's markets are developing at a steady pace. Modern-day China is mainly characterized as having a market economy based on private property ownership, and it is one of the leading examples of state capitalism. With that said, the government is committed to harmonization and transforming all of its peripheries into financial centers. A qualified financial foreign institutional investor scheme in 2002, for instance, tried to introduce and attract foreign institutional investors by allowing them to purchase a limited amount of securities using Chinese currency and to improve Chinese practices. By the turn of the century, however, China felt it needed to move towards a more modern economic model, and most importantly, to shore up investor confidence. And so, it began to ready itself to adopt the International Financial Reporting Standards. In January 2007, China became the 74th country to adopt the IFRS and demanded its 1,200 or so odd mainland-listed companies to follow suit and adopt the standards decision. IFRS has been implemented for a short while, and many researchers have shown that international reporting standards have actually encouraged investor confidence in China's capital markets and have been influential in spurring investment from both domestic and foreign investors. As of now, China is the world's fastest growing major economy and the second largest economy in terms of both the nominal GDP, totaling approximately US $7.298 trillion according to the IMF. China also now ranks 29th in the Global Competitiveness Index, and as many as 61 of its companies were listed in the Fortune Global 500. By embracing recognized norms, nonetheless, China has signaled a determination to help foreign investors make more sensible decisions, keep a rapid pace in a globalized, ever-changing world, and address many credibility gaps that it may have had in the past. As China's markets expand and its economic might becomes more forceful, its accounting profession is transforming. Let's turn it over to Kemi to give us a glimpse into the country's accounting profession.
Thank you, Aki. There are three types of ownership in Chinese companies. State-owned companies are owned nearly 100% by the central or local government. Approximately 70% of companies fall into this group. Of all, 149 largest companies are owned by the government. Listed companies are owned 50% or more by the government. The last type of company are privately held. In 2012, 73 companies are listed in Fortune 500. Of all, 61 companies are owned by the government. 12 are private. A typical successful Chinese company is Peope. It is an oil refinery that is owned 100% by the government. It was fifth in the Fortune 500 in 2012. More than 1 million employees work for this company, and its income growth was 24% between 2010 and 2012. Currently, 12 million people are working as accountants or accounting clerks. Of all, 8 million are central government employees. So this proportion is parallel to the ratio between the number of state-owned companies and number of privately held companies. Responsibility of accountants. Responsibility of accountants is similar to that in Western France, with more weight toward traditional data accumulation and reporting. However, the role of accountant has been shifting to more strategic partners. Further, the demand for accountants is very great in China. All of these three trends are due to transition from the planned economy to the market economy. If accountant wants to work for state-owned company, he or she has to pass exams. There are 3 layers of exams. The basic is elementary level exam. 1,600,000 people have passed this exam. The next level is the qualified accountant, QA. 800,000 people have passed this exam. To be qualified for this exam, a candidate has to have 4 years of work experience. First time passing rate for QA exam is 11%. The highest level is the senior qualified accountant, SQA. 22,000 people have passed this exam. To be qualified for this exam, a candidate has to have a university degree and greater work experience. The first time passing rate for the SQA exam is 20%. However, 87% of CFOs call for a better certification system. Each large or medium state-owned company has a chief accountant appointed by the government. The responsibility of a chief accountant is similar to that of a CFO. So for instance, Mr. Yu is the chief accountant of Peope, the oil refiner I introduced before. According to the company's website, Mr. Yun is a professor level senior accountant with master degree. Most CFO in Chinese firms are either SQA or QS. However, once again, 87% of CFOs preferred different selecting systems than appointment by the government. I introduced in-house accounting in China. Now, Natalia will introduce public accounting in China.
The shift from a planned economy to a more market-oriented economy has resulted in a change of accounting practices. Accounting has become much more significant since accounting practices can reveal the efficiency of enterprises. The goal of government agencies is to indirectly guide rather than carefully monitor these enterprises. And a company's profitability has become an important component of its performance. Accounting in China contains 4 distinct levels. The first foundational level is comprised of accounting law, first established in 1985 and periodically revised since then. Over this first level is administrative regulations, which include financial regulations, which include financial reporting rules established by the State Council of China in 2000. The 6 elements of accounting: assets, liability, equity, revenue, expenses, and profit are redefined by these rules. The third level addressed accounting standard accounting system, issued by the Ministry of Finance, called the Chinese Accounting Standards. These standards are very similar to IFRS. By 2007, all listed companies were expected to use the Chinese accounting standards. The final level overline all of the previous ones is work specifications for accounting. This includes accounting voucher, ledger, statements, and maintenance of accounting archives. It also addresses accounting controls to prevent theft, misappropriations, and other potential offenses. As I mentioned before, the Chinese accounting standards and IFRS are similar, but there are differences between them as well. For instance, related parties is required for IFRS, but would be impractical for the Chinese accounting standards because about 60% of all Chinese enterprises are owned by the state, and therefore are considered related parties. Reversal of impairment losses for long-term assets is not allowed by the Chinese accounting standards because these losses are considered to be permanent. IFRS, on the other hand, always allows this except in the case of goodwill. Combinations involving entities under common control are not permanent under IFRS. But in China, while most companies are under the common control of government agency, it is allowed through the use of pool of interest methods. Non-current assets held for sale and discontinued operations require that they should be measured at the lower of book value or net realizable value under IFRS. These standards are not explicitly addressed in the Chinese accounting standards, but certain guidelines are mentioned in the other standards. The financial reporting in hyperinflationary economies is explicitly regulated by IFRS, but not so by the Chinese accounting standards. The Chinese accounting standards does use this reporting for Chinese companies abroad. There are currently 7,790 CPAs firms in China. These firms provide services to about 3.5 million
to 1999, China took 20 years to establish auditing standard. Each change of auditing standard is accompanied with economic or political reforms in China. Prior to the open door policy in 1979, auditing played a very limited role in China. The government was the single source of financing for state enterprise, and there had virtually been no foreign investment. By June 1988, auditing in China primarily served the function of tax compliance checks. Within the deepening economic reforms in 1993, the function has gradually shifted away towards lending credibility to financial statements. In 1996, January the 1st, the first independent auditing standard in China became efficient, which regards as a landmark of Chinese accounting profession. In 1997 and 1999, the second and third bunches of 17 standard, 5 practice pronouncements, and 3 related general standards on professional ethics, quality control, and continuing professional education became effective. As such, the regulatory framework of professional standards for CPAs in China has been basically established. Now, China is adopting a significant number of the accounting standards laid out by the accounting standard. However, as China's unique political system and national conditions, there are also some standards remaining differences. Now, let's talk about the 6-phase framework to identify the environment in China. There are 6 environment factors shape the auditing environment. They are legal environment, political environment, technological environment, market setting, self-discipline, and organizational considerations. First, let's talk about the legal environment. The property protection in China is weak, and the government requires highly of the private company. The state-level bureaus and agencies play important and involving role in enforcing and administrating China's growing body of commercial law, along with regulations on imports and exports, financial matters, and in sensitive areas like intellectual property and environmental protection. Political environment. The Communist Party owns and influences the state-owned enterprise, which controls the main part of the Chinese economy, such as the electronic, the transportation, and the energy. The next factor is the technological environment. Now, in China, the Chinese companies are becoming less reliant on foreign technology, and the scientists are to pursue indigenous innovation. The next factor is market setting. China is moving towards a fully market economy, but the capital market in China is controlled by the government. It is characterized by weak equity outsiders, strong market speculation, weak firm efficiency, extensive earning management, and deceptive reporting, and large-scale market manipulation. The next factor is the self-discipline. Civil management is very rare, and thus the CRIC is the prime discipliner of firms and their managements. The executives influences much of the external auditing, and their awareness of self-discipline is weak sometimes. The last factor is the organizational considerations. In the ownership structure of listed firms, blockholders are usually the state and quasi-state institutions such as the SOEs. The dynamics in Chinese boardrooms are likely to be different from those of their counterparts in American countries. For example, Chairs are full-time executives and they wield significant power, and senior management typically started their career as government bureaucrats. Now let's begin to talk about the Chinese auditing practice.
So I will discuss about the Chinese auditing standards, and as we discussed previously, the government played a huge role in terms of accounting principles and auditing principles. For instance, the business operation was fully controlled by the government, and as Jing Lee said, prior to 1979, auditing played a very limited role, and they auditing in China primarily served the function of tax compliance checks rather than financial statement audits. And due to the continuing economic reforms, and since the Chinese economy has grown immensely, recently they decide to make their accounting and auditing principle in harmony with international practices. And this led them to be so basically on December 25th, the MOF approved and issued the first set of 10 independent auditing standards. And also the Article 4 of the Chinese General Standard states to express an audit opinion on the legitimacy and fairness of the entity's financial statements and the consistency of the accounting treatments. And this article is very similar to the US GAAP and US GAS, the generally accepted auditing standards. And this also shows that Chinese standards are more specific about the objectives of an audit. And furthermore, the Article 5th of the Chinese General Standard on Professional Ethics requires that the auditor to remain independent in form and in substance. And also the international standard stresses the same importance as well. They stress the importance of both the appearance and the substance of independence as well. Just like US GAS, where they stressed out the importance of the auditors remain independent. And also similar to ISA 20, China has issued a general standard on quality control to ensure that all audits are conducted in accordance with laws and regulation. And I'll move on and talk about auditing evidence. Chinese auditing standards number 5, auditing evidence, mentions that it requires the auditor to obtain sufficient appropriate evidence necessary for the expression of an opinion and issuance of an audit report. And this is very similar to US GAS. And and also the auditor should exercise his professional judgment to decide whether evidence is adequate and appropriate based on the factors such as audit risk, materiality, misstatements, or irregularity, and types and sources of evidence. Sufficient appropriate audit evidence may be obtained by such means as inspection, vouching, observation, inquiry, and confirmation, computation, and AP, which stands for analytical procedures. When obtaining evidence through compliance tests, the auditor should consider such factors as the existence and effectiveness of the client's internal control system. So in these Chinese standards, they are reinforcing the client's internal control system as well, just like the US GAS. When obtaining evidence from substantive tests, the auditor should consider such factors as the existence of or occurrence, rights, and obligations. And the audit evidence, like I said, the audit evidence can be obtained from compliance tests and substantive tests, such as analytical procedures. But in Chinese standard number 11, which deals specifically with analytical procedure, mentions that this AP is not required, unlike US auditing systems. In US GAS, during the planning phase and during the reporting phase, AP is required by GAS, but in Chinese, it's just optional. It's on auditor's discretion to whether to use AP or not. And I'll move on to talk about the audit report. Yeah, So the content and the structure of the Chinese audit report are very similar to the audit report from US GAAP, and also it is very similar to the international standards. It requires that the auditor's opinion paragraph convey 3 following messages. First, whether the financial statement conform with ASBE. Second, whether the financial statement is presented fairly. And lastly, whether the accounting principle was consistently used. And this is basically the audit opinions in the audit report. Just like US, they have unqualified opinion when the auditor could not find any material misstatements or whether there was any adjustment was necessary. And unqualified opinion, again, just like a US gas, it is issued when the auditor detects any material adjustment or whether the evidence was not be able to obtain. And an adverse opinion, of course, when it seriously violates ASBE. And lastly, the auditors will issue a disclaimer when he or she cannot obtain audit evidence due to scope of limitation. And in summary, to sum up all our presentation, we briefly touched on the Chinese economy and also that the Chinese has been adopted IFRS. And China has reached its final stage currently in adopting international financial reporting standards in which all companies are required to follow IFRS. And accounting standards regulators in China adopted IFRS through 3 phases. In 2006, China adopted a completely new set of China accounting standards, abbreviated as CAS, that are based on and generally consistent with IFRS, with a few exceptions. All listed Chinese companies had to comply with the new set of CAS by the start of 2007. The required use of the new CAS will be expanded to all state-owned enterprises controlled by the Chinese central government starting in 2008, and then all large and medium-sized companies in China starting in 2009. And that's where the accounting standards and auditing standards in China right now. And we also touched on the allowable contents, and we talk about CPA exam format in China, which was extremely hard compared to US. Passing rate was 5%, whereas here is more than 4%. And we talk about the auditing and accounting framework, as well as we briefly touched on the comparison of IFRS and Chinese auditing standards, and we mentioned about the similarities as well as differences. And lastly, I talked about the auditing environment and principles. And this was our presentation, and I enjoyed that you had a lot of information from us.